What is church?
Is it a building?
With some pews,
A piano?
and stained glass?
Or is it something more?
2,000 years ago, the church was born.
It wasn't made up of the famous, the rich, or the powerful.
It was made up of everyday people who passionately believed in the message of Jesus.
It was the beginning of a revolution of love and freedom that would change the world forever.
Today, the church is stronger than ever.
And continues to impact every corner of the world.
Over 300,000 churches in America.
And almost 5 million churches around the world stand ready to be instruments of change.
The ripple of Jesus' impact can be clearly seen and felt in the church today.
And it's made up of people like me and you.
Today, you didn't just come to a building.
You came to a revolution 2,000 years in the making.
The world is facing as much trouble as ever.
But we are not afraid.
We will continue to do what we've always done.
Proclaim the message of Jesus.
To help a world that needs him so desperately.
Welcome.
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 Welcome to church.
So when we welcome each other to church, we welcome each other to a body of believers that is wanting to know more and more deeply what it means to be church. So for the past several weeks and today and the next week, we're exploring what it means to be church, not only for ourselves, but what it means to be church in the world, what it means to be church and to have a practical impact on life in every dimension that we live when we are not here in this building. So we are exploring what it means to be church. Today, we talk about what it means to be church for three categories of people. First group of people are called the nuns, not people who dress in habits, not N-U-N-S, but N-O-N-E-S, the nuns. People who, when asked what they believe, when asked what sort of faith community they're a part of, the answer is none. No particular church or mosque or synagogue. Lots and lots of people in our lives are nuns. My guess is that if you are breathing and paying attention, you know some people in your lives, whether it be your family or somebody at work or a neighbor, who doesn't have any particular interest in being a part of any kind of community of faith. And so when we think about being church for the nuns, we have a particular situation. Another group we call the spiritual but not religious, SBNR for short. I was going to get there. And so as I said, we are, and this is working right. Yeah, we're good. So the nuns, we know that there is a rise in the nuns. We know that there are more and more people as a percentage of people living in the United States who refer to themselves as nuns. And we know that today, about 26% of the population of the United States, when asked, think of themselves as nuns. No particular belief, no particular concern, no particular interest necessarily in a faith community. So we know that the rise of the nuns is happening. When a nun is asked, what do you believe? Nothing in particular. So the nuns form a pretty interesting cohort of people, and as we think about what it means to be church, as we think about what it might mean to communicate with people who say nothing in particular, with people who say none when it has to do with connection to a faith community, we have some opportunities and we have some challenges. A couple of statistics I'd like to share with you from the Pew Research Center. Based on telephone surveys conducted in 18 and 19, 65% of American adults now describe themselves as Christian, down from 77 in 2009. The portion that describes their religious identity as atheist, agnostic, or nothing in particular, 26%, up from 17% in 2009. So we have more and more people who think of themselves as what we would call the nuns. No particular investment, no particular connection. 28% of younger Americans between 23 and 37 attend church. We are beguiled often in the church by our seeming inability to connect with folks who are between 23 and 37 years of age. Many of us, myself included, are working as hard as we can to find ways to connect with young adults, many of whom have no interest in being a part of any faith community. So when we think about being church, we need to think about what it means to speak to young adults, many of whom have no interest or commitment or desire in being a part of an organization that is about being church. The spiritual but not religious people are people who are spiritual but not religious. And one of the reasons that people in the SBNR category don't want to think of themselves as religious is because they look at the church and see it full of hypocrisy. And so I think of myself as spiritual, but I don't want to be a part of an organization that looks to me to be filled with hypocrisy. There was an older woman in the congregation I served in Michigan, who liked to say, well, if you think that the church is full of hypocrites, there is always room for one more. Always room for one more. We aren't perfect. We don't always get it right. We do our best to follow Jesus. We know that we can be hypocritical. We know that we miss the mark. But we have been claimed by Jesus, and so we follow in the best way we know how, and we try to connect. You know people who are spiritual but not religious, just like you know people who are nuns. It's a big and it's a growing number of folks. Then we have people we call seekers. We're all seekers in some way. We're all looking for something more. The seekers, there's got to be something more than this. There's got to be something more than getting up in the morning and taking a shower and shaving and having some coffee or tea or orange juice and a bagel or an English muffin or Fruit Loops or oatmeal or something, and then getting into the car, opening the garage door, heading off to work. We work and work and work. We come home and we're exhausted. We pull into the parking lot. We open the garage door. We drive into the garage. We put the garage door down. We go inside and we try to find something to eat that won't take too much effort. And then we have something to eat. And then if you are on the cultural cutting edge, you sit down and you watch The West Wing. And then you maybe fall asleep in your chair. And maybe you get up at 2 o'clock in the morning and you go and you get a few more hours sleep. And you do the same darn thing over. There has to be more than this. Don't you think? There has to be more than this. Why am I here? Why do I happen to be here at this particular time and this particular place? What is my purpose? Why am I here? And what is my purpose? And does God have anything to do with it? Does God exist? Does God have anything to do with my particular life? Why am I here? There's got to be more. What's my purpose? What does God have to do with it? Well, Nicodemus, who was a leader of the Jews, had some questions about his life. He had some questions about his purpose. He was afraid to come to Jesus in the light of day, and so he went to Jesus in the cover of darkness because he wasn't supposed to have so many questions for this teacher, for this rabbi, but he was really wanting to know what was the purpose of his life. And so he talked to Jesus. And Jesus used kind of interesting esoteric language. He said, you have to be born from above in order to see what God is about and what I am about. And Nicodemus said, well, what do? Do you go back into your mother's womb for a second time? It just didn't make sense to him, but he kept seeking. He kept asking questions. And finally, Jesus said to Nicodemus, God so loved the world. God loves you, Nicodemus. God has a purpose for your life. God has a reason for you to live and to thrive. And that reason is me. Jesus. In the flesh, you are seeing God's face, and God has something for you. God has something that will make a difference in your life for the sake of the world, because God so loved the world. We go on to chapter 12 in the Gospel of John, and Jesus says, "And I, when I am lifted up from the earth," what's he talking about there? He's talking about his crucifixion, "will draw all people to myself." When I'm lifted up from the earth, I will draw all people to myself. I'd like you to join me, if you would, in reading the last phrase in this sentence. It starts with will. Let's read it together. "Will draw all people to myself." Now, I'd like for us to read it again, and this time I'd like to emphasize the word all, okay? Here we go. "Will draw all people to myself." What Jesus is saying in this passage, in this sentence, is that when he is lifted up, when he is glorified on the cross, when he gives his life for the sake of the world, he will draw all people to himself. Not just a few, not just people who fully understand what he's about. He will draw all people to himself. Nicodemus. Jesus has been crucified. Now it's in the light of day. Nicodemus is no longer afraid. He knows he has a new purpose. He knows his purpose is to live as a disciple of Jesus. He knows his purpose is to share that love. God so loved the world with all people, and there he is in the light of day. He's found courage. He's found faith, and he loves Jesus. He anoints his body for burial, and of course we know that that's not the end of the story. The tomb will be empty, and now Jesus is on the loose. I love the story of Nicodemus because I think it's our story. Sometimes we're afraid that our family members or friends might see us actually exploring our faith, and so we kind of do it in the cover of darkness, and then we come to a place where we're saying, "I'm not embarrassed. This faith is changing my life." And so to be church is to be able to share that with the world. Sometimes when I talk to people who are a little bit skeptical about Christianity, or who hear kind of heavy-handed messages from some people who are followers of Jesus, like, have you been saved? And, if you were to die tonight, do you know where you would go? And of course, the easiest answer is to say, I would go to the morgue. But do you know what's going to happen? Instead of saying, do you know what already happened for you? Do you know what already frees you to live in love and to live with courage, the faith that you've been given? When were you saved? We were saved in 33 AD, when Jesus was lifted up. And what did he say? I will draw all people to myself. So that's been taken care of. We don't have to spend a lot of time worrying about that. The question is, now that we have been saved, how will we live? How will it change our lives? But how do you know for sure? God says, no worries, I got this. I got this. Nothing to worry about. But here, having been saved, having been lifted up with all people, having been given this gift of salvation, what do people see when they look at us? What do they see? At the 9:30 service, I told a brief story that I'd like to share again today, and I think you'll be able to relate to it. On Friday morning at our book discussion group, we were talking about this, about what it means to witness to our faith, about what it means to give witness to Jesus in our lives. And one of our members, Margie Maurer, told a story about her husband that kind of embarrassed him, because Don, her husband, would never have told this story about himself. But she talked about the day that Don was retiring, and they had a little party for him. And person after person came up to Don and talked to him about how he had impacted their lives in some wonderful way. Don was just being Don. See, Don being Don is undergirded by a sense of faith in Jesus. Don being Don is undergirded by a commitment to live in that way, as Paul says in his letter to the Romans. So what do they see? What do they see when they look at us? When we say, I'm all about Jesus, what do they see? Well, Paul says this, let love be genuine. Do you love genuinely? Hate what is evil. Hold fast to what is good. Love one another with mutual affection. Isn't that a nice image, to love one another with mutual affection? Outdo one another in showing honor. Outdo one another. Do not claim to be wiser than you are. My goodness, that can certainly apply to all of us. Live peaceably with all. If your enemies are hungry, feed them. If they are thirsty, give them something to drink. What do they see when they look at us? When we say, I know I have been saved. I know God has done that. I know I don't have to earn that. What will they see when we announce to the world that we are followers of Jesus? What will they see? How many of you have seen our church sign and seen these words? So at 9:30, how did I ask it? Yeah, something like, how many of you have not seen the sign? And almost no hands went up. They were lying in church. A Jesus life shows up in the other 167 hours a week. That's pretty good. A Jesus life shows up the other 167 hours a week. So what do people see when we leave this space and we show up for work and we show up at home with our families? That's a challenging kind of invitation, and yet I think the message is clear that we do our best to be church. We've been saved. We don't have to worry about that. So what will we do now that we don't have to do anything, really? And what will people see? Sometimes evangelism committees love to bring a friend to church Sundays, and it's a great thing. In fact, we probably ought to do that maybe after the holidays. But bring a friend to church. What is that all about beyond bring a friend to church Sunday? I'm a big fan of college football, and I'm a big fan of Ohio State football. And I have been invited to 4 different games this fall by a person I love. He's an old college roommate, and he's invited me to these games with the kind of energy that is just amazing. Imagine if you and I had that kind of energy. I want to invite you to Epiphany. I want to invite you to be a part of this community of faith. I am going to pick you up. I'm going to sit next to you. I'm going to show you the coffee bar. I'm going to show you the restrooms. I'm going to give you a tour of the place because I really want you to know what this place is about. Think about that. Think about the opportunity to share with some real energy the faith we have in Jesus. You know what? You have been saved and I've been saved, and we don't have to worry about it. God has done it. That's the message you're going to hear here, but you're also going to hear that we want to be about impacting the nuns and the SBNRs and the seekers. So maybe this week, give it a shot. If you haven't invited someone in a while, give it a try. They might say no the first time. Although when I invite a person to church, just so you know what my approach is, when it's a neighbor, I'll say, okay, we'll say, Bob, I'd like to talk to you about something. Okay? And I'm going to ask you a question, and unless you're ready to say yes, don't say no right now. Okay? Bob would love it if you could come to Epiphany sometime. Don't say no yet. And sometimes the Spirit works, and what do you know? There he is. So maybe take the pressure off yourself to have to make it happen in that moment, but give it a whirl so that somebody knows you're excited about what's happening here, because what's happening here is great stuff in the name of Jesus. Bring a friend to church. next Sunday. Be church for the people you know the best, and maybe even not all that well, but that you'd like to have be a part of this place. Bring a friend to church. Be church for them. Amen.